one or the other. All right, let's move on. We do have our guest in studio with us now. I'll tell you a bit about Jodie Emery. She has been fighting for the rights for Canadians to access cannabis. Is that uncomplicated enough for you? I mean, she's going to get into the rest of the details, but she now is being punished by not being able to be a vendor. She'll tell us a little bit more about how that works. I'm going to ask you to lean in. So, Jodie Emery, welcome to Green Crush. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jodie is in let's call it trouble right now. But let's go back to a time when you transitioned from a person that didn't know anything about really cannabis or marijuana or what have you, and how you got into that and what in there. A lot of people do get interested and use it, but not everybody goes as far down the road with activism and awareness as yourself. So just describe that process for us.
Well, in high school, I was against cannabis and against drugs of all kind, and I loved a man in uniform. I was an authoritarian teacher's pet, leadership student, and my best friends started smoking marijuana, so I gave them a very hard time about it. But 9/11 happened, and I realized that my pot-smoking stoner friends were actually more informed than anyone else about international politics, war, the military-industrial complex, and everything. So they were watching Pot TV and reading Cannabis Culture magazine, which were creations of my now husband, Mark Emery. So I started thinking that, maybe these guys aren't so stupid after all if they're the marijuana users. They're smarter than everyone else. So I decided to try marijuana myself and beer as well. I didn't like beer, and so I stuck with weed.
At the same time?
Yep, the same night I finally decided to do that and took a few shots of Pilsner beer because I thought it was so disgusting, but I wanted to try. And yeah, I found cannabis actually worked for me, but it also made me question everything else I'd been told. It started, from a teacher's perspective, I started not being very obedient, I suppose, and not quite the person that they expected. Everyone always thought I would go off, be prime minister someday or law school and all that. So cannabis for me was quite a shift because it changed the way I thought about everything, and it offered me a lot too. So I moved to Vancouver in 2004. I started hanging out at Cannabis Culture headquarters, which is the BC Marijuana Party headquarters. I ran for office with the BC Marijuana Party in 2005 and became the assistant editor of Cannabis Culture magazine that year as well. And then Mark got arrested by the U.S. government, and he and I were in love, so he and I married, and then he got extradited on a 5-year sentence, which was a plea bargain from a 30-year mandatory minimum for sending marijuana seeds through the mail to Americans all over the world.
Hang on a second. A 30-year mandatory minimum.
Yes, he was facing 30 years
seeds.
to life in prison, and the DEA statement said it was because he financed legalization, because he gave millions of dollars away, and he had nothing when they arrested him.
Right.
It was all about making money for the movement, and he was tremendously successful and helped a lot of people and a lot of organizations back in the 90s and early 2000s when it wasn't at all like what we're seeing today. So
it sounds like he was forcing people by knife point to take a poison or something. But you're saying that he was selling seeds to American people who were purchasing this of their own volition in the mail.
And the DEA said that he was the most wanted international drug trafficking kingpin in Canada, one of only 50 in the world. And that's in the DEA's own press release. And meanwhile, Mark Emery has no property, no money, no guns, no drugs, not even a car of his own. He had nothing. The whole point was that he financed legalization. So that's what Cannabis Culture and Pot TV we've always been about that. It's activism for us, but you need money to make a difference in the world. So Mark was always very successful at that. And so when he got out of prison, we decided in order to survive and to be able to give back to the community, we would start something new. So I came up with this dispensary model where we would not be medical. We would be openly for all, non-discriminatory. All adults over 19 can come in and get cannabis no matter what the reason. And that was a beautiful model. It was what legalization should look like. But of course, the government doesn't want us getting away with that. So we were arrested in March of this year, and I'm currently out on bail. Facing serious penalties too, potential life in prison with the mandatory minimums and everything else that they can apply. So obviously trying to work out a good deal of some sort, but even a good deal is still going to be a serious punishment and a hurdle.
Sure.
And the future may not be so friendly for me and many of the other innocent Canadians who have been persecuted by this insane, unjust law. But I'll just keep being an activist then, as always.
Quick question. When Mark was sentenced to a 30-year mandatory minimum, and this is going to sound like the wrong word, but he only did 5. But
he took a 5-year plea deal.
Oh, I see.
And then 2 of his co-accused didn't go to prison at all.
Okay.
And Michelle Rainey died of cancer the year that Mark was extradited to the U.S. So that's what they do. They give you these enormous...
Who is Michelle Rainey?
Michelle Rainey is a medical marijuana activist and his business partner, and she was part of cannabis culture, and same with Greg Williams, Marijuana Man. So Mark Emery, Michelle, and Greg were the BC3, and all around the world we had international rallies time and time again to say no extradition. So Mark ultimately bargained down a 5-year deal, and plus, all the evidence showed it was a political persecution.
Right.
It was unheard of that a U.S. government could come into Canada and arrest a Canadian here for something done in a country he never went to. So there was this major issue of sovereignty, but that's back in 2005, and for many people, that's ancient history. So,
Right.
One day the books will come out. There's a lot of movies, though, if people care to find out. The Prince of Pot versus the U.S., all that sort of stuff.
And Pot TV has a lot of people. They interviewed me a while ago, and it's predating YouTube, and it's got a lot of watchers from a long time ago.
It was one of the first video websites ever on the internet, and it was back when people only had dial-up. And on the same day, CBC News launched their video website on the interwebs. It was like back in the old days. So that was Mark led the way in many great ways. So it's exciting to see how much has been accomplished since then.
I think that when you get into this angle of you changed your mind when you were a young girl, if I can use that term without getting in trouble in today's times. you were very young.
I was 16, so
yeah. So you were a young girl there, and at that point, when you started to realize these changes, when your friends had a better take on geopolitics, etc., than your other sort of straight friends, I think this is really where they're coming from. I think this is why your husband was accused of these things, because he wasn't holding a knife to someone's throat. He was merely a purveyor of what people were asking him to bring.
And offering liberty, since cannabis gives us all freedom of our mind, our spirit, our health, our bodies. So, the threat of cannabis isn't the plant itself.
Right.
It's a plant. The threat is that when people use it, they become more peaceful and tolerant and more open-minded and able to put aside prejudice and put aside hate and anger and to be more at peace. And it sounds like a hippy-dippy dream, but it's true. It's real. It makes you question authority. And what I went through is exactly what they don't want the world going through. And all I can hope is that as more and more people approach cannabis from the medical perspective or the recreational, excitement of legalization angle, whatever reason people use cannabis, ultimately, I think it's just going to help us start to question everything, as people already are,
sure,
with respect to, the government and the system and the way things are. But cannabis, it can help with that and healing as well, and dealing with the grief that we have to go through.
It seems obvious because so many of us want to use it and we don't want to go to jail, and so many of us that love us and care about us that don't use it also don't want us to go to jail, and this tiny little nexus of control freaks.
Right, and for what reason? I can't understand why they hate us so much, aside from the fact that I guess we question authority. I mean, that's why they persecute Falun Gong practitioners and harvest their organ. When you cannot be controlled by the state, they really, really hate that. So cannabis offers that sort of freedom and liberty, and that's why there's the war on cannabis during the 60s. And, there's history to this. But, when I see them demonizing us, and I wake up and I still see the lies and the propaganda and the government sponsored, which means taxpayer funded, but government sponsored misinformation and propaganda that's designed to demonize us, to make us continue to be seen as hedonist, sort of indulgent sinners who can't be trusted not to sell pot to kids just because we aren't the government. It's offensive. It's appalling. And it goes deep, deep, deep into all parts of society. And the fact, right now while we're talking, sure, there's a lot of people making money on pot businesses and stock market companies, but there are people right now having their kids taken away by Children's Aid because they dare use medical marijuana without a license because they couldn't find a doctor, and how dare they? So this is a horrific war on people that they're using a plant to justify, and arguing about how the marijuana is so bad for our health. I mean, it makes me I can't believe that the government can call marijuana a threat to public safety and a threat to public health. That's the terminology they're using. And I'm saying, how can you say that? The law enforcers are more of a threat to our public safety and health. They're killing people.
Absolutely.
And so it's distressing. So some days I wake up very mad and fired up. Other days I wake up more in a positive frame of mind. And I think today I'm just a little bit leaning towards the cranky about it
side.
Well,
I understand that. It makes me laugh when I think of this, because you remember in 9/11, shortly after 9/11, George Bush was saying, they hate us for our freedoms. And that was nonsense. But these folks really do hate us for our freedoms. I like to remember every time that the world is so screwed up with the constant wars and all the secret wars and going into Yemen and all the announced wars and all the fake reasons for wars, like earlier April this year in Syria, let's give it to them. They're all clear-minded thinking people. They haven't used cannabis. They don't use cannabis. And this world is so designed to have perpetual spiral inflations and wars because those people who are unaffected by cannabis, or so they claim, this is what they've brought to us. This is what we have to labor under. And they tell us that we're nuts for trying to chill out. I mean,
I know.
it's unbelievable.
Infuriating. So thank goodness cannabis helps us relax, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to deal with this drug war madness.
Yeah, it's great for trauma. And there is a lot of trauma.
Yes.
I played a clip earlier where the police were apologizing for what happened 35 years ago, and they don't see the exact same similar rights. I cited the numbers: 300 people busted, 3,000 people protesting. We're way beyond that now. There needs to be some kind of rallying cry. So let's move forward to we were on our way to legalization, or whatever that's called. And you were in Ottawa giving testimony at the HESA hearings.
The Health Committee, the Standing Committee on Health.
How did you get on that board? What were you telling them? And were you frustrated by what seemed to my observing eyes as being completely ignored?
Well, I was invited by Don Davies of the NDP because he's done a fantastic job trying to defend the cannabis community and call for decriminalization and trying to hold the Liberals to account for their crazy criminalization campaign that Bill C-45 represents, and that's the federal legalization, so-called legalization bill. So Don Davies was wonderful to invite Mark and I to speak and give testimony, and that video is online. Someone actually just tweeted it at me today, so I retweeted it on my feed. So that's it was a great opportunity to speak truth to power, but it's also discouraging to see how little it really matters.
Just
so
ignore
when
it.
the government says they want consultation, they are just going through the motions, really, the motions of democracy. But we do have an impact, because I have to remember that even the fact we're talking about legalization means that they've been forced to have to say they're going to change things. At least there's that. We're right in as much as they've admitted our campaign and calling for legalization is the public sentiment and must be done, but they're trying to not do it as much as they can.
Where they've been fully ignoring it for years and saying, no, that's it.
Yeah, mandatory minimums and everything. Just recently, like even Julian Fantino, this ex-police chief, ex-commissioner, he's one of the perfect examples of hypocrisy at its finest, because not only did he enforce the law against people, not only did he support mandatory minimums for cannabis, not only did he compare marijuana legalization to legalizing murder, not only did he say he would never put his name on a marijuana business, what did he do? He's gone and made a marijuana business. He's cashing in. He's not apologizing for the harm done. He's not saying we should stop arresting people. I mean, these hypocrites, these profiteers who got paid by our tax dollars to oppress us and hold us down are now cashing in and denying us the ability to be able to participate. It's incredible. Like, cannabis legalization should have been about reparations and ability for the poor and the marginalized and young women and young men of all these groups that are traditionally left out. They should have had a chance to take advantage of this to create jobs and create business, but the government's not going to let that happen. They don't want to apologize for the harm done, and it's especially offensive, as you noted, that they're apologizing to other groups that they've unfairly criminalized and persecuted. So when's our day coming? When do we get the apology too? We don't. They're still persecuting us now and lying about pot to justify it.
On that note, you were also speaking at that hearing. And you were referencing specifically, because somebody was very upset about it, as per their diktat, that you were supporting evidence that talks about what it does and doesn't do to young minds. But just before we do that, speaking of Julian Fantino, let's not forget, we need to ban Alethea. Alethea, the company brought to you by Julian Fantino. He thinks he's going to profit from his bullshit. You have the power to say no. If you're dealing with Alethea, you're making a mistake. Boycott Alethea and any other business that a former politician or policeman who used public funds is now profiting from. The power lies in your hands. Buy your shit somewhere else. Alethea, designed to coddle a fat pig. Don't go there. Okay, so you were in Ottawa and you were testifying, and there was a Quebec mayor or something, and they have even crazier laws, I think, now than we do, if you can believe it. But you were talking specifically, and I'm going to listen to you, and so is everyone on the show, referencing this very hot flashpoint. Sorry if that's too bright for you.
The sun is wonderful.
There's a curtain, and we're having sun in November in Toronto. That's incredible.
Nice.
You were talking about a very important point, I think. They always use it. It's a trick. They always use it to talk about children and their minds. And what about the children? We have a segment on the show. And I used a clip of yours at those hearings to explain to everybody how it's not what they say it is. So tell us exactly what the data is, or your understanding of it, because this is a flashpoint for them to go, no, this is terrible. And of course, this is a ruse. It's like a puppet show.
Oh yes, they're always using kids, save the kids, as a reason to keep criminalizing adults. And even though cannabis oil is literally being given to children to help them not suffer from epilepsy and other ailments, we're literally saving lives with cannabis for infants and babies and children. So when it comes to teenagers, everyone's going on and on about teenagers and the developing brain, and they shouldn't be allowed to use pot until they're 21 or 25 even, because the brain keeps developing. And I'm thinking, this is insane. You encourage them all to take pharmaceutical drugs that are mind-altering, like the antidepressants I was on and got off of with cannabis's help. But they give these young people all sorts of drugs. They're not concerned about sports and how that affects the developing brain with
CTE,
concussions.
playing football,
Yeah,
sure.
and there's all sorts of ways that young people are being harmed. And so they're trying to somehow paint cannabis as dangerous for young people. But what I wrote to the health committee, and I have it in a brief, it's been posted on their website, and I've shared it around. But I noted that the British Medical Journal had a report on 19 drugs and said that cannabis is the least harmful to everyone out of all these drugs. And the American Psychological Association in 2015 did a study called Chronic Adolescent Marijuana Use as a Risk Factor for Physical and Mental Health Problems in Young Adult Men. But they found that teenagers who use cannabis are no more likely to experience health problems later in life than non-users, even if they're chronic consumers. And then teenagers don't experience IQ loss from cannabis, according to the British Association for Psychopharmacology. In their journal, the Journal of Psychopharmacology of January 2016, they said, are IQ and educational outcomes related with cannabis use? And they studied it, and they said that it doesn't impact IQ. And then finally, we have teenagers and psychosis, the dreaded reefer madness devil, the devil weed that possesses your mind and drives you insane, the insane, evil cannabis and psychosis. Well, the Journal for Adolescent Health in June 2017 studied cannabis use and polysubstance use on psychosis spectrum symptoms, and they found minimal evidence for any association between cannabis use by itself and psychosis spectrum symptoms. They said if teenagers use cannabis and alcohol or cannabis and tobacco or other drugs, there may be issues, but when you remove all those other drugs and it's only cannabis, there are no issues. So I don't understand why or where they're getting this insane information that cannabis is harmful for young people, while we still have 5% of the young boys in Ontario on Ritalin, which is speed, and nobody's batting an eye.
Well, yeah, because they don't want to hear you. I was amazed at you had a version of that you actually laid down at the hearings, and they just ignored. Okay, who's next?
Yeah.
Like, there's no comment on this. There's no back and
No,
forth.
because
no
then-
one's saying, now, wait a minute, Jodie, where did you get these numbers? This is fascinating. We've been studying this for years to come up with these laws, and we never heard this.
Well, it gets even more maddening with the driving stuff. Speaking
Oh,
of mad,
right.
mad. They're driving me crazy because they're lying nonstop about cannabis and impairment and cannabis and crashes. And we have the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration studied it and said cannabis does not increase the odds of crashing at all. It's like next to zero. And then you have the American Journal of Public Health released a study this summer. They analyzed legalization in marijuana in states, and they found no increase in crashes at all. You hear the government constantly saying, oh, well, they increased the number of people with pot crashing in their cars. And it's like, no, what you're doing is you're drawing blood from these human beings and finding that they used cannabis at some point in the last month and then trying to blame the accident on pot when it's not. It's always alcohol or other factors. But they're detecting cannabis in people. But of course, cannabis shows up long after you use it. So this is just infuriating. And then you also throw in the extra little tidbit about how where you legalize marijuana for medical purposes, you have a 9% decrease in traffic fatalities because people are drinking less and smoking more. So marijuana saves lives, and yet they're trying to tell us it's harmful and dangerous. I just cannot get over, and I feel like I'm going insane. I feel like I'm insane. All of the evidence proves the
Points the
opposite.
other
And they
way.
keep saying, oh, we don't have proof. Oh, well, we have proof. You're just not listening
Yeah,
to
from
it.
Civilized Life, it says Canada's new driving regs could criminalize 200,000 medical marijuana patients, according to a group of 50 defense lawyers recently sending an open letter calling on the feds to rethink the proposal threshold. But of course, they're not going to do that. Let me ask you a couple of quick bullet questions. I know you have to get out of here soon. Really quick, short questions. So this has been pending for a while. You've heard Kathleen Wynne in Ontario and her team. When she didn't even announce it herself, she had a team of the Larry, Curly, and Mo come out. And did you see it happen? Because they came out now.
I was there, actually.
Elon, were you really? I tried to get in.
It's a scene.
When Elon Musk or someone like this comes out with his new Powerwall, or someone has a TED Talk talking about a cool thing, they're always excited about it. They're saying, no, this is going to be great, and this is how it is. And Richard Branson, love him or hate him, we're going to have a new airline. I'm going to have a mobile phone company, love it or hate it. He's always excited. These guys come out shuffling, looking down like they just got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. I mean, how much more? Did they not send them to body language school, or the most people are too clued out to notice this is a scam going down? So they say they've been working on it for a year on that day. 2 days later, the cops come out and say, don't put this through yet. We're not ready. So your preparations didn't involve a fucking phone call to the RCMP, you idiots? So where else have they made mistakes? We're at a place where we've got pending impractical legislation. We've been shown before that impractical legislation vis-a-vis the 2015 vape law, which they pulled off the books the next day because it was impractical, or so they said. Now I can't even count the impracticalities. Let me ask you this. Obviously, they didn't do the work, or they think they did, and it's obviously a bunch of lies. You should really pull up this video clip of the announcement. If I'm changing the paradigms, I'm there, but not sending out my 3 clowns. But I want to ask you this. These folks, the Attorney General, the health guy, all these folks, do you think they're not at all profiting on a sort of an insider knowledge trading basis of like, look, we have the reins of power. We know what's going to come. We know how we're going to shape it. Fuck Jodie Emery and her husband, Mark, and all the other people that understand these facts, and we're going deep pockets like Julian and everything else. How many cops are deeply invested into this on the one hand, and on the other hand, they're busting people today? How many police chiefs, there's a police chiefs association, are investing on it on the one hand because they knew it was coming, and on the other hand, they're busting people? What's your level of awareness of the sick dirt on this topic?
Well, it's perfect you mentioned that, because in about 10 or half an hour, I'm going to be talking to the Guardian UK newspaper about this very subject, because I've just compiled a list when I came and sat down with you here.
Oh, this is great.
I just finished the list.
Now,
of
did we
cops.
talk about this beforehand?
No,
we
at
did
all.
not.
It's
Okay.
serendipity. It's
Go
perfect.
ahead.
So police in the cannabis business. You've got Norman Inkster. He's independent director at Metrum. former head of the RCMP. That's our
Didn't they have a
National Military
contamination?
Police Force.
Did they have a contamination issue, Metro?
Look at this. They did, actually.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
They're
Metro
one of the
was
many.
one of the bad ones.
Yeah.
So Cash Heed, strategic consultant with National Green Biomed, former BC Solicitor General and West Vancouver Police Chief. Tim Humberstone, ABCAN Director, 20-year member of the RCMP, included roles in municipal and federal drug enforcement and with the Joint Forces Organized Crime Agency. Jake Ryan, Director of Security at Tilray, former RCMP intelligence officer. Kim Derry, Deputy Chief of the Toronto Police and promoter of THC Meds Ontario. Senator Larry Campbell, advisor to Votus Innovative Pharmaceuticals, Inc., also former RCMP and Vancouver mayor and sitting senator. Barry Daniel, Wildflowers head of security, former Abbotsford police chief. Julian Fantino, co-owner Aleafia Total Health Network. He was the Toronto police chief, chief of York Region, chief of London, Ontario Provincial Police Commissioner. And his buddy, Raf Sukar, owner of Aleafia Total Health Network with Julian and former RCMP deputy commissioner. And Frank Elsner, principal consultant for Umbra Strategic Solutions, security for the marijuana businesses, former Victoria police chief who resigned in disgrace. So there you go. That's a short list of what I have so far.
That's a
if you
short
have
list.
more, send them my way.
Well, great, because of course folks listen to the show, that The Guardian still has an article up that's 16 years old that explains how cannabis is a wonder drug. I don't know if you've seen that one before. Have you seen that before?
No, but I did get to write something for them about Halloween candies and the hysteria about weed in your candy.
It says here that it's a wonder drug capable of radically transforming, etc. It goes on to say that anecdotal is yesterday's news. Because when you get the same anecdote around the world from thousands of people who don't know each other getting the same results, you have to look into it. Listen, I really want to thank you for coming on the show today.
Well,
it's been an honor for me. It's such a thrill that you're here. And hopefully you'll come back. I don't understand where you're always somewhere.
I'm here in Toronto mostly. Bail conditions require it. So if I got to thank the cops for anything, I did always say I wanted to live in Toronto. So, hey, there you go. Thank you, officer.
And your quick take on January 20th. This is the day that Julian Fantino, same kind of thing, Bill Blair has said we will have up until then to view the pending legislation.
That's right.
What the frig point is that when they've already passed it through the 3 readings and it only awaits senatorial assent and royal assent?
When Bill Blair, former police chief of Toronto, also the overseer of G20, one of the biggest mass civil liberties violations and arrests in Canadian history. But this guy, he's been telling everyone, you better pass this bill. This is how it's going to be. This is what we're doing. And yes, they're opening up for consultation for 2 months. Now, if we're overwhelmingly bombarding them with cannabis facts and truth, please do. I mean, we really, really need people to take action. You have to engage, even though they're slippery, slimy politicians. They do govern our lives. And so we have to go try and petition them and lobby them. And right now you've got this 2-month period. I'll make sure I retweet later in the day the link to the Canada website so people can go find that. But yeah, please have your say, because ultimately that's one of our only tools to fight back against the man peacefully, as we always have done before.
Tools to fight the tools. Sounds like a great idea. Thanks for coming, Jodie. Jodie Emery, everybody. The Princess of Pot. I don't want to hold you up. You can stay if you want. We're going to finish up, but I know you have to leave.
And thank you for speaking out to the Premier as well. That was fantastic.
Oh,
I loved watching her squirm, because how dare she support something that harms and criminalizes people like you who have already been through so much, but so many others out there suffering still. You know, they can't stand seeing those smarmy faces lying about cannabis being a health risk and hazard, when people like you and so many others prove cannabis is good for your health, not bad.
I was taken to task by a very tiny percentage of people that I didn't just pull off some quick quip to get her to answer the question. But I have to say the reason I didn't do that is because she was going to give the same answer regardless.
Oh, exactly. That's
and
true.
I just wanted her to be on camera as long as possible until I was forced to ask something, because she doffs off in the House all the time against people that criticize her in the houses, in the legislature, and I just wanted to see her stand there and take this on.
Yeah, no, she's supposed to represent you, so she better stand there and hear you out. So, yes, everyone have your voice heard. And
okay, well, thank you very much again. Thank you, Jodie. All right, that's Jodie Emery, everybody, and what a great guest. Maybe we'll have Mark in sometime. I'm glad you're here, but not for the reason of being held accountable under under a ridiculous law such as that. And